All right. Take two. So we're up to 63-64, and we are 3 years out from expansion. So I changed the makeup of the board here, and I'm going in kind of a different order. And then it'll be completely different when we get to the 12-team league in a few days. I'm going to do the whole thing different at that point, and we're going to try to get everything onto one board. I'm going to do my best. But Montreal leads the way in the regular season, 36, 21, and 13. 1 point better than Chicago is 36, 22, and 12. And hey, look, Toronto 33, 25, and 12, or 33, 25, and 12. So very excellent seasons put together by Toronto, Chicago, and Montreal. Again, Detroit's right there in fourth at 30, 29, and 11. And then there's this giant chasm of 19 points. Below that, you'll find the New York Rangers at 22, 38, and 10. Followed by Boston, who I don't know what the hell was going on with Boston during this period other than just mediocrity. 18, 42, and 10. That's sad. Really, really, really sad. It's been a number of seasons now, and I don't know, maybe Chicago heard me mocking them earlier in the series for their inability to win games, but now Chicago's up there thanks to guys like Bobby Hull and Stan Mikita, and Boston just doesn't have it. The Uke line is gone by this point, and it's a disaster. Your first team All-Star, Stan Mikita, the Chicago Blackhawks, first team. Warham of Chicago, right wing, first team. Bobby Hull, Chicago, left wing. Pierre Palat, Chicago, defense. Glenn Hall, Chicago, goaltender. A lot of Chicago in there. And they were nice enough to allow Tim Horton of the Toronto Maple Leafs to get a spot on first team defense as well. Second team, Beliveau of Montreal at center. Gordie Howe, right winger. Frank Mahovlich at left wing. Vasco of Chicago is on the defense. And Laperriere makes his first appearance in one of these videos as a defenseman for the Montreal Canadiens. Of course, Jacques Laperriere will play a role in a future dynasty for a Montreal Canadiens team. And Charlie Hodge of the Montreal Canadiens is your second team All-Star goaltender. June 4th of 1963, Gump Worsley and Jacques Plante switch teams. Can you imagine how miserable that must have been for Jacques Plante? The guy invents the mask, the guy takes Montreal to a dynasty, and then it's like, well, that was nice, but we're going to trade you out. There were other players involved, but the main parts were Worsley and Plante switching places. And Plante would not stay in New York for an extended period of time, but I'm sure he wasn't happy while he was there, because look at that record. Can't have made him very happy. November 10th, 1963, Gordie Howe passes Rocket Richard with his 545th goal. On January 18th of 1964, Terry Sawchuk gets his 94th shutout to become the number one shutout leader in terms of NHL goaltenders. And on February 8th of that same year, he played game number 804 to become the all-time games played leader among goaltenders. So here's Gordie Howe passing Maurice Richard. Took him more games to do it, so I'm sure people would have complained at the time that, well, yeah, but Richard was a better goal scorer because he did it in fewer games. Would have had a point. And for Sawchuk, his records, he plays in a different era. Those guys played in an era where there were less games played. Always that argument. November 8th of 1963, Maple Leaf Gardens does something that you think they would have done on day one when they put together the building. They installed separate penalty box doors after Pulford of the Leafs and Terry Harper of the Habs had a shared penalty box fight. And I want you guys to picture this. Linesmen prying them apart on the ice, putting them in a penalty box together, and them fighting inside the penalty box. Just imagine if we had a shared penalty box now. You know, how many times a game do you see it where you've got two penalty boxes and they're yelling over at each other? Just imagine if they were in the box together. Now, I have to admit, this would make hockey immediately 200% more entertaining, fights 200% more likely, and that penalty box camera would be isolated in the corner of a screen during any given play after a fight's taken place, because people would know they were going to argue with each other. You might even mic the guys up on their way into the penalty box, or at least have a boom mic hanging over top of them, because that would be some entertaining conversation. Just the amount of chirping that would go on would be amazing. Or potentially the camaraderie between these guys. where they're walking through the fight step by step, like, oh man, you fell down, and I had to punch you in the face because you were down, and it was funny. And then the other guy'd be like, I didn't think it was funny when you punched me in the face, but touche. And then, it would be very entertaining, but Maple Leaf Gardens, I don't know why it took that for the NHL to say, this is probably a bad idea. But again, it is the NHL. March 22nd, 1964, Eddie Johnston plays every single minute of every game of the Boston Bruins season, and he's the only goaltender ever to have that kind of misery. 18-42-10. Every single minute of every single game, Eddie Johnston's in net. And he should have been given the Vezina for it, really. He really should have. Beliveau gets the Hart. The Art Ross goes to Stan Mikita. The Norris Trophy goes to Pierre Pilote. The Calder goes to Jacques Laperriere of the Montreal Canadiens. We'll hear from him again soon. The Vezina goes to Charlie Hodge. The Bing goes to Warham of Chicago, who, of course, was the first-team All-Star that year. And the number 1 pick goes to Claude Gauthier of the Detroit Red Wings. He played a grand total of 0 games at the NHL level. And this is why there's not much point in getting into the draft, because, again, year 2 of the draft, it's just sort of this nebulous thing. They're not really worried about it. It's not like they broadcast it. They have it at a hotel. It's behind closed doors. I think it's even by the phone. I think they just call in all their picks. It's not really organized the way it is now. There's no tables and cameras, broadcasting around the world and any of that stuff. It just doesn't happen. The playoffs have an interesting foible in them this year, in that every single series went 7 games. Toronto and Montreal, the series, Montreal has home ice. Home ice doesn't mean a lot in these playoffs. Montreal wins 2-0. Toronto wins 2-1. Montreal wins 3-2 to take a 2-1 series lead. Toronto ties it up with a 5-3 win. Montreal then takes a 3-2 series lead with a 4-2 win. Toronto wins at home 3-0 and then wins in Montreal 3-1 to win the series in, 7. Detroit and Chicago. Chicago wins at home 4-1. They then lose to Detroit 5-4 at home to tie the series. Detroit wins. Chicago wins 3-2 to tie the series again in overtime. Chicago wins then to take a 3-2 series lead over the Detroit Red Wings. Detroit wins at home 7-2. Detroit then wins 4-2 to win the series in 7. There's your pattern. Does the pattern continue? Let's see. Detroit goes into Toronto. Again, we have the Red Wings and the Maple Leafs as Stanley Cup finalists, but their team's 3-4. So the underdogs win in these series, proving home ice doesn't matter, right? Sure. And this is 1964. Toronto wins 3-2. Toronto loses 4-3 in overtime. Detroit wins 4-3. Toronto wins 4-2. Detroit wins in Toronto 2-1 to take a 3-2 series lead. They are 1 game away from the Stanley Cup. Toronto wins in Detroit 4-3 in overtime, which had to be a heartbreaker for Gordie Howe, Terry Sawchuk, and the boys. And then Toronto beats Detroit handedly 4-0 in Game 7. This is one of those rare times where not only do you see all series go to 7, which I'm guaranteeing never happened before or since, but in every series, the team that was up 3-2 lost the series. Traditionally, when you have a 2-2 series tie, the team that wins Game 5 usually wins the series. They've got 2 chances to do it. Odds are they're going to win it. This year, nope. In all 3 cases, the answer was no. So there you go. The 1963-64 season, a strange year, but the standings stay relatively the same. Chicago is a have now. Boston is a have not. But other than that, you've got Montreal, Toronto, and Detroit. Now, Detroit's run at playoffs and being respectable is going to start getting challenged once Gordie Howe leaves, but we're still a ways away from that. But for now, there's your 63-64 season. Let me know what you guys think in the comment section below. Do not forget to hit like and subscribe if you're browsing your way through. You just happened upon this video. Thank you guys so much for watching. I'll talk to you again soon.